I am Dr. Sunil Birujbar, GPA Joint Secretary, welcomes all you for today's lecture. Welcome all doctors. GPA सध्याच्या कोविडच्या सर्कमस्टान्सेसमध्ये GPA आपले जे लेक्चर्स घेतात ते फेस टू फेस लेक्चर न घेता आपण ऑनलाईन लेक्चर्स सध्या घेत आहोत. आणि त्याच्यामध्ये महत्त्वाचा विषय असलेले हायपोथायरॉइडिझम अँड फार्माकोथेरपी हे महत्त्वाचं लेक्चर आपण आज घेणार आहोत. आणि त्याच्यामध्ये स्पीकर पण आपले तेवढेच रिनोन असलेले डॉक्टर वर्षा जगताप मॅडम आहेत. तर आजचं लेक्चर सुरू करण्यापूर्वी मी डॉक्टर GPA प्रेसिडेंट डॉक्टर कृपा अग्रवाल यांच्याकडे माहिती सुपूर्द करतो.
Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all for this beautiful rainy evening and a beautiful topic with our beautiful speaker. As sir correctly said, today's corona situation is really making our life little tough. But I guess this is also an opportunity for all of us to learn things in a different way using technology along with the medical science. And for the same reason, GPA also has been trying few things. Like last week, you all must have you must have come across a online form which is supposed to be filled by all GPA members. This is just a form to refresh your information on GPA records. So a humble request to all GPA members to fill up the form as well as to send a scan copy of your records to GPA email. Maybe it will just make things easier as well as it will give us a chance to become little techno savvy. So with this, once again, I express my gratitude to all of you for joining us, and of course DigiShield for providing us the technical support. Here I hand over back to Secretary Dr. Sunil Bhujbal sir.
हॅलो, थँक्यू डॉक्टर रुपा मॅडम. आमचे जे कन्व्हेनर आहेत ते डॉक्टर लीना बोंडे मॅडम, यांचं मी आपल्याला जस्ट थोडंसं इंट्रोडक्शन करून देतोय. शी इज अ बॅचलर ऑफ होमिओपॅथिक मेडिसिन अँड सर्जरी इन 2000. She is a postgraduate diploma in hospital management, PGDHA, in 2003. She has done certificate course in acupressure in 2000. She is a Lyme member of GPA and our LIMA. I hand over charge to Dr. Lina Bonde, madam.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome for today's session on pharmacotherapy of hypothyroidism. Thank you, Joint Secretary Dr. Sunil Bhujbal, for introducing me. I'm indeed blessed to be a part of GPA, and I wish to do lots of work here. Moving quickly to introducing our speaker for the day, Dr. Varsha Jagtap. She's a gold medalist. She's MD Medicine and DM Endocrinology. Just give me a moment. She's assistant professor in endocrinology, BHRC, consultant endocrinologist, DMH, and she also has her clinic at Jagtap Clinic and Research Center, Pune. She's an eminent practitioner with 20 national and international publications, Dr. Palekar Prize and late Prabhakar Ramdas Sadhare Prize, where she got a gold medal for standing first in MD General Medicine from SAGE GSMC and KEM Mumbai in May 2008. She's also got the Best Paper Award at ESICON in 2011 for the topic Clinico-Radiological Correlation in Idiopathic GHD. She also presented the Best Interesting Case at Amrita Certificate Course in Endocrinology held at AIIMS, Kochi in 2011. The Best Oral Paper at ITSCON 2011, Prevalence and Impact of Thyroid Disorders on Maternal Outcome in Asian Indian Pregnant Women. She's also won the Best Resident Super Speciality in KEM Mumbai in 2012. Before we ask ma'am to start the topic, I request all of you to please mute the audios and the videos And please post all your queries in the chat. We have a really well-read speaker to enlighten us today. Over to you, ma'am, for you to start the topic for the day. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction. So let me start. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So today's topic is about thyroid pharmacotherapy. Before I start, let me thank Dr. Rupa Agarwal and Dr. Pravin Darak for doing all the coordination and for inviting me here. So the brief that was given to me is that when I'm going to talk about thyroid pharmacotherapy, I should also focus some part on on pregnancy. So what I have done is I have talked about medical management of hypothyroidism. I'm going to talk about pregnancy, hypo as well as hyper, and in hyperthyroidism I'll be speaking about certain case scenarios. Okay, so let us start. So I was told that we should be directly moving on towards medical management, but what I feel is that unless and until we understand how to interpret a T3 T4 TSH report, we will go wrong. So only if we know what is the diagnosis, then we know how to treat. If we don't know what is the diagnosis, we will end up treating wrongly. Okay, so I'm going to show you 4 sets of thyroid function report, 4 sets of T3 T4 TSH. I will tell you which one is normal, which one is abnormal, and why is it so. Okay, so this is a 46-year-old female. She's coming to you with complaint of weight gain. And if you see, her T3 is 34, the lab reference range is 40 to 180, T4 is 10, the lab reference range is 4 to 11, and TSH is 5.1. The lab reference range for TSS generally is 0.4 to 4, or in some labs it is 0.5 to 5. Okay, so her TSH is mildly elevated and her T3, isolated T3, is on a lower side. So in this kind of patient, the diagnosis of this patient is actually more of a euthyroid versus subclinical hypothyroidism. So here I want to emphasize one point, that if you get isolated low T3, but the T4 is completely normal, the TSH is completely normal, then please neglect that reading. Okay, T3, isolated low T3 has got no significance in the presence of bang normal T4 or bang normal TSH. But if the TSH is on a higher side and your T3 is low, then definitely it has got relevance, and then it should be investigated further and treated further. Okay, now coming to another case scenario. So 16-year-old female who has got goiter, her T3 is normal, T4 is normal, but her TSH is slightly elevated. Now in this scenario, this becomes an important finding. Because she has got a goiter, she is young, there is no reason for her TSH to be on a higher side. So this lady requires treatment, as against the first lady who was 46-year-old, who does not require treatment and may actually be just a subclinical hypothyroidism, milder variety. Okay, then 35-year-old female who is coming to you with a complaint of fatigue and amenorrhea. Okay, and if you see her T3 is 34, T4 is 4, so T3 and T4 are both very low, right? The normal range is given here. So normal range for T4 is 4 to 11, and her level is 4, so it's on the lower side of the normal, very low for that matter. And when the T3, T4 are low, TSH is not elevated, but TSH is normal. So this patient might be having a pituitary problem. Okay, and she also has got amenorrhea, long-standing amenorrhea, again gives a clue that she could be having a pituitary problem. So this thyroid function test should not be neglected, and it is suggestive of pituitary issue. Okay, now coming to this last scenario. So a 4-year-old male complaining of short stature. In him, again, the T3, T4 are on the lower side and TSH is normal. It is not raised. When the T3, T4 are so low, in primary hypothyroidism, we expect the TSH to be very high. But that is not seen in this 4-year-old child. So this child could be having central pituitary hormone deficiencies. So combined pituitary hormone deficiencies. So the child could be having a growth hormone deficiency associated with central hypothyroidism. So this is how interpreting a thyroid test, a T3, T4, TSH is very, very important. And if we do not interpret the test properly, we cannot treat it properly. Now this slide, please bear with me, but it is a very important slide and I need to show it in each and every thyroid presentation of mine, because this shows the relationship between the free T4 and the TSH. So the free T4, the normal reference range is 0.7 to 1.8 nanogram per DL. And for TSH, so this is on the y-axis is the TSH values. Okay, so the relation between free T4 and TSH is linear. Okay, and what we see is that when the free T4 falls from the upper side of the normal to the lower side of normal by around 2 times, so the drop is from 1.8 to 0.7. Okay, but the rise in TSH is 100 times. So for this 2-time drop, the TSH actually rises 100 times. So this is a linear inverse logarithmic relationship between T4 and TSH. So whenever you interpret a T3, T4, TSH report, it is important that you take this into consideration, that it has to be a logarithmic relationship. So if your T3, T4 are normal and TSH is high, that is expected, because we don't expect the T3, T4 to fall down in the early stages of hypothyroidism, primary hypothyroidism. But if in case your T3, T4 are very low and the TSH has not gone up beyond say 20, 30, 40, then there's something wrong with the pituitary of the patient. So it's important to understand this relationship. Now, coming to this first patient of mine. So she's a 55-year-old female. She's perimenopausal and she's complaining of mood fluctuations, hair fall and weight gain. And if we look at her thyroid function test, her T3, T4 are normal, TSH is slightly high. So what is the diagnosis and what do you want to do? So as I have told previously, so this patient is basically having subclinical hypothyroidism. So whenever you treat a patient of subclinical hypothyroidism, what do you decide? So when the TSH comes out elevated, okay, then you look for the T3, T4 levels, you look at the thyroid antibodies, and you look at the lipid profile. Okay, if the TSH is more than or equal to 10, whatever be the antibody, we generally treat these patients with thyroxine. Okay, if the TSH is less than 10 and if the antibody is negative, okay, if the antibody is negative and the patient is elderly, no symptoms, like this patient of ours who is an elderly, and then we just decide to follow them up and we don't really treat them. Okay, but if the patient is young and she is wanting to plan pregnancy, so though her antibody is negative, but when she's having subclinical hypothyroidism and she wants to plan pregnancy, or she could be having goiter, then in such patients, we may decide to treat them. And if the antibodies are positive, then you should treat them, because the chances of them going from this zone to this zone, that is their TSH could be 6 now and their TSH could be 10 3 months down the line. So the chances of them going from subclinical to overt are high. And that is why those patients who are having positive antibodies are generally treated. Okay, so this patient's antibody reports were negative. Her lipids showed slightly elevated LDL cholesterol. She was not started on thyroxine. She was advised lifestyle modifications of diet, exercise, and weight loss. And with that, she was able to bring her TSH, which was in the range of 6.5. On follow-up, that TSH dropped. That TSH came down below 5 and her cholesterol levels also improved. So this subclinical hypothyroidism, elderly, antibody negative, you do not treat. As regards, if you have a young female, goiter, okay, and her TSH was 8.6. So though her T3, T4 is normal, okay, you have started her on treatment with thyroxine. And if you generally do an antibody in a patient who has goiter, it turns out to be positive. Okay, so this was a patient who is having autoimmune hypothyroidism, and though her TSH is not beyond 10, she should be treated. So when you started with the treatment, what is the dose of thyroxine that you give? So the dose that you generally give in overt hypothyroidism. So when I'm talking when the TSH is very high, so say someone's TSH is 20, 30, 40. So in that kind of scenario, the dose that you generally give is 1.5 to 1.8 microgram per kg per day. Okay. When it comes to subclinical hypothyroidism, so that means that the TSH is say 7, 8, 9, then in that scenario, you can give up to 1 microgram per kg per day in subclinical. General guidelines, okay, and they need to be individualized based on the severity and etiology, okay, and also the patient characteristics. So for example, if the patient has undergone a thyroid surgery, a hemithyroidectomy, and after hemithyroidectomy that TSH is say 8 or 9, then that patient will require a dose which is going to be less than a patient who has undergone total thyroidectomy. So the etiology of, I mean, why the patient has developed hypothyroidism is also important to decide about the dose, okay. If the patient is an elderly patient, then you don't want to go overboard with the treatment and cause low TSH. And so you might decide to give a slightly lesser dose in an elderly age group, okay. But if it is a pregnant female, then you will have to give a higher dose, because in pregnancy the dose requirement increases. When it comes to starting dose, so do we start less dose because it is an elderly patient? No. So if the patient has no cardiac problem, okay, though the patient could be elderly, you can start directly with the full dose. So if you have decided to give say 1.5 microgram per kg for a 50 kilo person, that comes to be around 75 microgram. So you will directly start with that 75 microgram. You need not start with say 50 for 15 days, then 60, and then whatever. So you don't need to do that. You can directly start with the full dose. For those who have cardiac problem, okay, for those who have cardiac problem, we'll have to start low and then increase it say every 15 days or every 1 monthly. You will have to keep on increasing it, and say maybe in 3 to 4 dose titrations you will reach the final dose. So that's to be done only for cardiac patients. So one more important thing to tell our patient is that the tablet always has to be taken in the fasting state. It has to be taken 45 to 60 minutes before eating, and that's important. Many of the patients are used to drink warm water, honey water, lemon water as soon as they get up, and then they generally combine it with this tablet, and then we have seen that that also interferes with the tablet absorption. So it's important to, you know, to stress the patient that no, you need to be completely empty stomach, and there after you have taken the tablet, then also you'll have to wait for 45 to 1 hour, 45 minutes to 1 hour, and any missed doses can be made up. So for example, if the patient has gone out of his town and he has forgotten to take the tablet bottle along with him, and he's come back home after say 4 days, then he can take 5 tablets together, okay. So because he's missed the 4 dosages and one of the same day, so he or she can take 5 tablets together on that day. So that's allowed. So up to 1 week the dosages can be made up, okay. As I have just now said, weekly dosing or end of the week catch up is also acceptable. At the max, you can take 7 days dosages. Okay. And after you have treated them, then what do? Then you follow them up with the TSH. Generally, we tell the patients to do TSH after 3 months. Okay. But if the patient is pregnant or has some other complication, then we might need to do the TSH say after 6 weeks also. In pregnancy, sometimes we repeat it after 1 week, 1 month, that is 4 weeks also. So when do you repeat the TSH is varies from patient to patient, but on an average, it is generally after 3 months. So after 3 months, if the TSH is between 0.5 to 5, then we continue with the same dose. If the TSH is below 0.5, then we reduce the dose, okay. If it is beyond 5, more than 5, then we increase the dose. How much to increase, how much to decrease is a titration which varies from patient to patient, and there's no roughly a formula or a strict guideline for that. I mean, it is only after you have treated the patient, and then with experience you learn that. So many a times we get patients where though they are taking the tablet regularly, they say that the TSH is not coming under control. Okay. So you try to understand from them whether how they are taking the tablet. Are they taking any other drugs? Are they taking immediately food after the tablet? So that's also important. Are they on any other drugs which can increase the clearance of thyroxine? So like anti-epileptics, rifampicin, these can do that, and therefore these patients can require a higher dose. If the patient is pregnant, then the patient will require a higher dose. If the patient has gained weight, then also the patient can require a higher dose. But the most common reason as to why the TSH doesn't come under control is non-compliance. So you will have to tell the patient to be compliant with the tablets. The way to check compliance is you can tell the patient to, start a new bottle, carry the new bottle to your clinic after 90 days. You can actually count the number of tablets and you can show to the patient whether the patient has taken the tablets regularly or not. So that is how you can check with non-compliance. And most common reason for TSH not getting normalized is non-compliance, though the patient may not say so. Now, coming to pregnancy. So the pregnancy guidelines have been revised in late 2017. So that is early 2018. We have started following these guidelines. So the TSH cutoff in pregnancy or a lady who wants to plan pregnancy is 4. So if the patient is not having any past history of thyroid and is first time presenting to you during pregnant state and the TSH is say 4.9 or 4.1, then it's considered as a high TSH for pregnancy and the patient should be treated. But the target, so when I start the treatment, but what is my target level? So in the first trimester, it is generally 2.5, and in the second and third trimester, it is below 3. So in the first trimester, you want to keep your TSH below 2.5, and in the second and third trimester, you want to keep it below 3. So this was the older paradigm. So earlier, prior to 2018, so till say 2017 end, we were treating all pregnant females, though their TSH was more than 2.5 also, we were treating them. Okay. So because the cutoff of normal was considered as 2.5, but this no longer holds true. Now this is an old thing. What you need to remember is 4 as the cutoff. So we are treating 4 to 10 and more than 10. Okay. So 4 to 10 is called as subclinical hypothyroidism in pregnancy, and more than 10 is called as overt hypothyroidism. So TSH more than 4, you are going to treat this pregnant ladies. And in pregnant ladies, for subclinical also, they might require a higher dose. So because pregnancy requires higher dosages, so they may require up to 1 to 1.6 microgram per kg. Some females actually require 2 microgram per kg. So the dose is different. Okay. Now, what do you do for those in whom the TSH is between 0.1 to 2.5? In those, you do not treat. So TSH below 2.5, you do not treat. Okay. Now, what do you do for those females in whom the TSH was between 2.5 to 4? Earlier, you used to treat them. Now, you are not treating them. On what basis? So it has been shown in studies that when the TSH is between 2.5 to 4 and their antibodies are negative, it has got no impact on pregnancy. It has got no adverse impact on pregnancy, and that is why it does not require treatment. So when the TSH is between 2.4, you should do an antibody and don't treat if the antibody is negative. But if the antibody is positive or the patient has got past history of recurrent miscarriages, then such patient should be treated with a low dose of thyroxine. Okay. So if the antibody is positive or if there's past history of miscarriage, then you treat. If the antibody is negative, you don't treat. But please remember, doing antibody in the first trimester is only important. If you do the TSH in the say 20th week, okay, 20, so she's 20 weeks pregnant and she's coming to you for the first time, and at that time her TSH is say 3, okay, then doing an antibody at that point of time may not be really helpful, because we know that as pregnancy advances, the antibodies can become falsely negative, because as it is with every situation, auto antibodies come down as the pregnancy advances. Okay. So in such scenario, what you can do is you can repeat the TSH after a month. So if the patient has presented to you at 20 weeks, and rather than with a TSH of 3, and you don't know whether the TSH can go up or not, then you can repeat the TSH again after 1 month and see which way it is going. So if the TSH is still remaining 3 or going down to 2, you need not monitor this patient further. But if the TSH is going up from 3 to 4.5 and all, then you know that she requires treatment. Some patients of yours may not be affording for antibodies, because we know antibodies are costly. then what do? Then just monitor the TSH. So if the TSH is between say 3 or 3.9, then you may just monitor it, repeat it again after 1 month. If it is increasing, treat. If it is decreasing, don't treat. Now, once you have decided to treat pregnant females, we need to understand that a lady who already has thyroid problem and now is becoming pregnant, they need to increase their thyroxine dose by around 30%. So that means around 2 extra tablets a week. So we sometimes tell the patient to take 2 tablets on Saturday, Sunday. It's easier to remember Saturday, Sunday. So whenever the pregnancy is confirmed. And patients in whom the antibodies are positive, but the TSH is below 2.5, and that's why you're not treating them. But we know that their antibodies are positive. So high chance that, their TSH can increase as the pregnancy advances. So for such females, we should just monitor their TSH more frequently. So you can do your TSH every month if the lady's antibody is positive, and start treatment immediately when the TSH goes beyond 2.5. Now, this is a very common scenario which you all must have come across during your routine practice. So she is a 24-year-old female. She is 10 weeks pregnant. Okay. And when you do her T3, T4, TSH, this is the report that you get. So the T3 comes as 190.5, T4 comes as 12.2, and the TSH is 0.05. And these are the lab normal ranges. Okay. Now, please understand that these lab normal ranges are for a non-pregnant individual. Okay. And what happens during pregnancy is that the total T3, total T4 are high. Okay. And the TSH is low. So this is normally seen in every pregnant female. The variations may vary. So like in some patients, the TSH can go down very less. In some patients, the TSH may not go down that much. But TSH generally does go down in the first trimester, and T3, T4 starts rising. Okay. So then you ask this patient to do a free T3 and a free T4, because you know that the total T3, total T4 can be high. So what happens? The free T3 and free T4 are normal. Okay. So this is what generally happens in pregnancy. So pregnancy is one situation where you might need to do free T3 and free T4. But whenever we do free T3 and free T4, we need to understand that the lab has to be a very reliable lab, because if we do free T3, free T4 from any routine lab, we may not get the correct results, because free T3, free T4 assays are very labile. Unlike T3, T4, T3, T4 we can do from any lab. They generally don't change. But free T3, free T4 are labile assays. Okay, so this lady is counseled that you do not have a thyroid problem. This is a normal physiological change that is happening in pregnancy, and you do not require any treatment for this. So what happens in pregnancy is that, so this is on the x-axis are the weeks of pregnancy. Okay, so HCG we know is a hormone which goes high in the first trimester. So up to 12 weeks it goes high. And because HCG goes high, TSH comes down. Okay. And the thyroid binding globulin, TBG is thyroid binding globulin. So that increases throughout the pregnancy. And that is why the total T3 and total T4 go up. Okay. So if we see the total T3 and total T4, they are 1.5 times the non-pregnant range. Okay, so it's important to understand that total T3, total T4 are 1.5 times the non-pregnant range in pregnancy. Okay, and in terms of free T4, the free T4 generally more or less remains the same throughout the pregnancy, or there may be a slight decrease. And as I've told you, there is lots and lots of assay variability. So make sure that you're doing free T3, free T4 from a reliable lab. And what happens to the TSH? As I've told you, there's decrease in the first trimester, but thereafter it comes up again and then it remains normal. Okay, so first trimester, there is a decline in the TSH. Now looking at the other scenario. So we have talked about hypothyroidism in pregnancy. Now I'm talking about hyperthyroidism in pregnancy. Okay, so if there is hyperthyroidism, right, and if what is the definition of hyperthyroidism? So in first trimester, TSH below 0.1, in the second trimester below 0.2, and in the third trimester below 0.3. Okay, so in such scenario, what is more important to see is what is the free T4 value. So if the free T4 is normal, as was seen in our that first patient, so the free T4 is normal, then such patients do not require any treatment. You don't treat them. You might just follow them up. You might repeat their free T4 and TSH after a month and see which way it is going. Okay, but when it is an overt hyperthyroidism in pregnancy, that means that the free T4 is high in pregnancy, then you definitely need to treat. And hyperthyroidism in pregnancy is very cliche area, and already ideally such all patients should be referred to an endocrinologist, because it is important to know as to exactly which trimester they are, how to read the free T4, because in them we want to keep the free T4 not just normal, but we want to keep that in the upper quartile of normal. Okay, and in the first trimester generally we give them propylthiouracil. Second and third trimester we can switch over to carbimazole or methimazole, and we monitor their free T4 every month. And then fetal monitoring is also important. Then again after delivery the neonatal monitoring is important. So hyperthyroidism with pregnancy is a very complicated topic. Now I have talked about pregnancy, I have talked about hypothyroidism. Now I am moving towards hyperthyroidism. So this is a 28-year-old female, and she's come to you with complaints which are since the last 6 months. Okay, so she has palpitations, weight loss, tremors, excessive sweating, and watering from the eyes, and redness also. And then you examine her, and she's having this diffuse goiter. Okay, so diffuse goiter, 6 months history. Okay, so then what do? The first thing that you do is you do a T3, T4, TSH. Then her T3 comes as 434, T4 is 18. So T3, T4 are elevated. Okay, they are, so T3, T4 are very high, and TSH is not detectable. That means less than 0.01. So TSH is not detectable. So this is a patient of hyperthyroidism. So in such patient of hyperthyroidism, to know what is the cause, the next step is that we do a thyroid technetium scan. So after doing this thyroid technetium scan, this was her scan. It shows that there is a diffuse uptake in the thyroid, and the salivary gland uptake is entirely absent. Salivary gland uptake should have been seen here. So that is completely absent. So this patient is having Graves' disease. So it's a diffusely enlarged gland and increased uptake in the entire gland. So this patient is having Graves' disease. So for Graves' disease, generally we can start with carbimazole. Some patients we start with 30 milligrams. Some patients we start with 40 milligrams, depending upon what the scenario is. So in this patient was started with carbimazole 10 milligram TDS. Okay, and she was also started with beta blockers 20 milligram TDS. Then she was asked to repeat her thyroid function test after 6 weeks. So after 6 weeks, she's coming to you. So T3 has come from 400 to 200. T4 has come from 18 to 11. But TSH is still low. Okay. So we need to understand that when we're treating hyperthyroidism patients, T3, T4 come down fast, but TSH takes long time to go up. So TSH may take up to 6 months, 9 months also to go up. So, but the treating doctor here thought that TSH is still low. So the doctor increased the dose of carbimazole from 30 to 40 milligram per day. Then what happened is that the patient came for follow-up after 3 months. And the reports were that T3, T4 were on the lower side and TSH was on the higher side. Now, please understand, this is not hypothyroidism. This is still a hyperthyroid patient, and the TSH has gone up due to the dosages of the carbimazole. So it's not really a bad report. It's actually showing that your treatment is working and you just need to reduce the dosages. But what happened is that after seeing this report, the doctor who was treating got scared and carbimazole was stopped. The doctor thought that the patient has gone into hypo. And the patient again returns after 2 months of stopping carbimazole with toxicity. And again, the T3 are high, T4 are high, and the TSH is low. So carbimazole is again then restarted, now with 20 milligram once a day. So important here is that when we are treating hyperthyroidism in the initial period, it's important to look at the T3, T4. TSH can remain low for months together. So don't be worried about the TSH. Look at the T3, T4 in the initial stages. Later stages of treatment, TSH matters. Once the TSH comes up, then TSH matters. Okay. So TSH is taking a longer time. You should not stop carbimazole abruptly, because then otherwise you'll just go ping pong, ping pong. So do not stop carbimazole abruptly. You should gradually reduce the dosages. And minimally, what guidelines say is that Graves' disease require treatment for around 1.5 years. But what we see in routine practice is that Graves' disease may require treatment for 5 years, 6 years. But after that, around 80% of patients normalize, and then they can stop their antithyroid drugs altogether. Okay, but this is again individualized. For some patient who's having a big goiter, they may not get normalized with only with antithyroid drugs, and they may require other forms of therapy. So, but on an average, 4 to 5 years is a duration that we would like to continue with antithyroid drugs, sometimes even longer than that. So Graves' disease treatment is generally medical. As I have told you, so sometimes when there is an active, when there is a big goiter, or if the patient is, going to, so a far away patient who cannot come to you every 3 months with a blood report, then such kind of patients can be given the option of radioactive iodine therapy. Radioactive iodine therapy comes in the form of a capsule, and then the patient just has to drink the capsule, and then the patient becomes hypothyroid for the rest of his or her life. Okay, and then they need to take thyroxine regularly, lifelong. But always look at whether the patient is having an active eye disease or not. If the patient has Graves' disease and have got active eye disease, okay, as a part of Graves, and then you subject this patient for radioactive iodine, they can develop vision problems. They can become blind because of the radioactive iodine dose if you don't take care properly. So it's important that in active eye disease, you should avoid radioactive iodine. And surgery is generally the least needed option. Ultimately, the patient's choice also matters. Some patients might go for radioactive iodine. Some patients may prefer just taking medical management for a long time. Now coming to another case of hyperthyroidism. So the first case I told you, she had symptoms for 6 months. Okay. Now this patient, 32-year-old, is coming to you with the symptom for 1 month. Pain in the throat. That's a symptom. Weight loss, tremors, palpitations for 3 weeks. And then when you see, she is having this small goiter. Okay. So when you do her investigation, her T3, T4 are high, TSH is low. And as I've told you, for hyperthyroidism, one investigation which you should do is thyroid technetium scan. So you do that. So here, this is the salivary gland uptake, what you can see, the dark one. Okay. And the faint one here, where there is no uptake, this is actually the thyroid bed. So thyroid is not taking any uptake. The thyroid uptake is 0. So this is very classical of subacute thyroiditis. Okay. While as in Graves' disease, what we saw is the uptake is more, and it is a diffuse uptake. But here the uptake is 0, and this goes in favor of thyroiditis. So this patient had thyroiditis. So in thyroiditis, we do not give antithyroid drugs. Those are not required. We treat them symptomatically with beta blockers, repeat their thyroid function test every monthly or so, and then we can make out that how they are improving. Okay. And then in this patient, after 3 months, she was much better. And it is just a symptomatic treatment. Some patient may require NSAIDs. Sometimes, very rarely, we give steroids if the pain relief is not happening with NSAIDs. So I have finished with my presentation. The take-home message that I want to give you over here is that in subclinical hypothyroidism, that is TSH between 5 to 10, go for individualized treatment. And here you should always do antibodies. In pregnancy, the cutoffs have changed, and pregnancy with hypo or hyperthyroidism, you should always refer. In Graves, long-term antithyroid drug therapy gives you a good result. So long-term antithyroid drug therapy should be preferred. And in subacute thyroiditis, it is a symptomatic therapy. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for your lucid talk. It was really enlightening. Many of the small queries which are there in day-to-day practice have been given to us very well. We can go to the question answers session directly. There is one question which I can see, ma'am. Can we consider it as cretinism? Now, can you just the question is not telling us as to which uh, case are they referring to? So does this help?
Uh, One moment. Acha, which case is not being referred? Maybe I'll just tell something about cretinism. So cretinism is means a very severe form of hypothyroidism that we see in congenital cases. So there are some children who are born with no thyroid, or their thyroid gland doesn't function because of dysharmogenesis, or they could be having an ectopic thyroid since birth. And if such children uh, have not been diagnosed and they go away just without diagnosis and without treatment, then it affects their mental development. So their IQ is very less and they lag in all the other developmental forms also, and that is called as cretinism. So I haven't discussed any case of cretinism in my presentation, but generally this is what we mean by cretin.
Right, right. Thank you, ma'am. The other question is from Adi Chaugale regarding case 1 with high TSH and with lifestyle modification. TSH reduced and we need to check it. How long should we wait to recheck if the TSH has reduced? That's what
Yes, yes. So generally 3 months is the time that you would wait, and repeat a TSH after 3 months. And for a patient whose antibodies are negative, then one TSH which you have shown it is normal, then you need not keep on repeating it every time. Okay, if the patient develops any new symptoms, or if the patient becomes pregnant, then you can repeat it. If your one TSH after 3 months is normal, you can leave it at that.
All right. Dr. Priyanka Talati has asked a question like hyperthyroidism. Can patients of hypothyroidism also reach a stage where medical treatment is stopped? Can hypothyroidism cause corneal or visual issues?
Right, good question. So, what we need to understand in hypothyroidism is that it is a mixed basket. Okay, so if your diagnosis of hypothyroidism is that it is autoimmune and that the TSH was very high, say more than 100 to start with, then such patient, the chances of the patient recovering and stopping thyroid medications is zero. I mean, it's close to nil. So that generally doesn't happen. But say if the patient had subclinical hypothyroidism and the TSH, the antibodies are negative, but the patient was taking thyroxine, say for 3 years, 4 years, and then when the patient comes to you for follow-up, then you do the patient's antibodies, those are negative, and then you slowly taper the medicine and stop the treatment. So that can happen. So what kind of hypothyroidism you're treating, that will decide whether the treatment is lifelong or not. Okay, coming to the second part of question. So hypothyroidism can cause dry eyes. If the TSH is very high, say 20 and 30, that can lead to dry eyes. That's the most common ophthalmological involvement. The other thing that can happen is very, very rarely. So like you get in Graves' disease, the exophthalmos. Sometimes hypothyroid or euthyroid patients can also have this thyroid associated orbitopathy, or what we call as exophthalmos. But otherwise, hypothyroidism by and far does not lead to major visual problems.
Right, ma'am. Adi Chaugale would also like to know, is it a good practice to do only TSH for screening and not T3 and T4?
Yes, that is a good practice because TSH alone is sufficient in majority of the cases, and it can help us diagnosing whether the patient is having hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism, whatever. Only in scenarios where the patient has undergone some pituitary surgery or has got radiation in the past, or if the patient is having long standing amenorrhea where you suspect that the patient could be having pituitary related issues, then you should do a T3, T4 and TSH. Otherwise only TSH is sufficient in majority of the cases.
Right, ma'am. So there is a question from Prasad Sonis. What are India for T3, free T3, free T4 test? I think he would want to know more about the free T3 and
Yes, so free T3 and free T4 tests are generally done. It's not required in every patient of thyroid. We do free T3 and free T4 in pregnant females. We do free T3 and free T4 in ICU setting, because in ICU setting the T3 T4 can be going haywire due to many medications and the sickness, the critical state of the patient. So otherwise, in a routine patient which comes to your OPD who is following up with you for hyperthyroidism, T3, T4 alone is sufficient. And when you do free T3, free T4, always do it from reliable lab. By reliable lab, I mean someone who's got a CLIA, someone who's doing Roche and, has been doing it. So you cannot do free T3, free T4 by methods other than CLIA. So, I mean, you'll have to just look as to what is the method that the lab has used and, what is the assay, do they follow all the QC parameters. So the lab has to follow a QC parameter and, keep on titrating or adjusting their assays so as to give a correct result of free T3, free T4.
Right, ma'am. Very helpful. There's another question. How should we approach myxedema? Should it be symptomatic approach?
So we need to understand one thing: myxedema coma or a myxedema diagnosis is a clinical diagnosis. I mean, it's not that TSH is more than 100, then every patient is myxedema. That does not happen. So you can have a proper walking, talking male or female with TSH more than 100 who do not have major symptoms at all. Okay. So diagnosis of myxedema is clinical. You could have myxedema coma at a TSH of 60, 70 also. So if the patient is having hypothermia, okay, the temperature of the patient is low, the patient is having hypotension, the patient is having altered sensorium. So then this patient fits into the diagnosis of myxedema coma. Then once you have diagnosed myxedema coma, it has to be treated in ICU setting. You cannot treat such kind of patient in ward. Okay, you need to give steroids also to this patient because the patient might be having some amount of adrenal insufficiency, and which is not evident. So steroids are also given in such a patient. So it's generally an ICU setting. Oral thyroxine is what we use. IV thyroxine is it's not available routinely, and it's oral thyroxine gives us a good result. With RT insertion, a higher dose of thyroxine is given in the initial. So initially we might give up to 4 microgram per kg also in the first 2 weeks or so. And then we repeat a T3, T4 early in such patients. So myxedema coma is a ICU management.
Right, ma'am. So I think Prasad has again asked this question: what are the indications of free T3? We've handled that.
Yes.
Go to the there's another question from Dr. Sanjay Wagh, which is what is difference between free T3? That again has been answered. Dr. Uttam Shinde would like to know. A lot of people have the same query, and
Okay.
he just asked, when patient is on routine treatment, what needs to be done. I think you've done a good job. You've told about that. Patients, there is Dr. Anu who's asked, patients antibodies present, but patients stop treatment after few years on her own. TFT normal at present, what to do?
So if this patient is an elderly patient and is not planning for pregnancy, has finished whatever the pregnancy part, then you can just keep on monitoring the TSH every 3 months. Okay. But then you need to be careful that such kind of patient should follow up regularly with you. Now, please understand, if a doctor is telling the patient to take the treatment and that patient has actually stopped the treatment, then such kind of patient is a defaulter. So very high chance that this patient will default to you also. And maybe after 1 year or 1.5 years, this patient can present with very high TSH value to some another doctor and tell them that no, ये doctor ने बोला कि दवाई बंद किया तो भी चलेगा. ये नहीं बोलते हैं वो कि हाँ डॉक्टर ने बोला था 3 monthly TSH करो. So, I mean, they are not clear on their part, but they will implicate you. So, but if the patient is your routine follow-up patient, you are very clear that this patient will not get lost to follow-up, will keep on doing the TSH every 3 monthly, then you can, not give treatment, do a TSH, and if the TSH goes more than 5, then you can start this positive antibody patient on treatment. If the patient has got a goiter, and though the TSH is normal, but antibodies are positive, then you should start this patient on thyroxine, because otherwise the goiter can go on increasing.
Right. Really helpful. There's one question: how significant is hypothyroidism in babies after delivery?
So I'm slightly confused with the question. I think they want to know about hypothyroid mother and babies of hypothyroid mother. So if the question is about babies of hypothyroid mother, then the risk is not much. I mean, if we have treated with thyroxine properly, the mother, then the baby doesn't have an increased risk of developing whatever hypothyroid related issues. If my parent, one of my parent has got thyroid problem, then I can develop a thyroid problem after the age of 20. That chances are high. Okay, but that generally happens generally in the second decade. That doesn't happen in the immediate neonatal period.
Right.
Now, if they are asking about neonatal hypothyroidism, that means the baby himself or herself has hypothyroidism, and that has been detected at birth, say maybe due to edema, due to whatever bradycardia, or due to prolonged neonatal jaundice. So these are the presenting features by which neonatal hypothyroidism gets detected. And then such children should be started as soon as possible with thyroxine treatment, and it's imperative to treat them properly, because otherwise their mental development and all will not be proper if they are not given treatment at right time.
Right. So Dr. Harshala Babar has asked, only TSH is sufficient or ultra TSH is required?
So TSH is sufficient in majority of the cases. See, ultra TSH means, so TSH means your report will come as 0.03. And ultra TSH means you will get the report as 0.003 or 0.001. So ultra TSH means it will give you an exact value to the least decimal. Okay. Now that one decimal point here and there really doesn't make much difference in terms of management. So doing a TSH alone is sufficient in all. If the lab is doing ultra TSH, okay. If they are not doing, then also okay.
All right. Dr. Reena Adhav has asked, in hyperthyroidism, how many years it takes for TSH to raise if it's low, and T3 and T4 is normal, though, and patient is on carbimazole?
Generally, it shouldn't take more than a year. I mean, if you are giving the dosages properly, then it may take up to 9 months to 1 year. It doesn't take many years. So if it is taking many years, that means your dosages are wrong, or the patient is not taking the tablets properly.
Right. So Dr. Suhas Nene has asked, is additional dose of RAI required anytime?
Yeah, so we have patients of Graves' disease who have huge goiters, and in them one dose may not be sufficient. In around 20% of patients who undergo radioactive iodine dose, they may require a second radioactive iodine dose. Generally, we wait for 6 months to 1 year before we repeat radioactive iodine, because radioactive iodine takes time to start its action. So we wait for generally a 1 year before we go for a second dose of radioactive iodine, but it may be required in some patients.
Right. Dr. Sanjay Wagh wants to know, what is the difference between free and regular?
So free T3, free T4, and total T3, total T4. So we know that all hormones, so not just thyroid, but all hormones are bound to protein. So the protein bound fraction and the free fraction, that together is called as total. And generally the free fraction is the one which works, which is biologically active. Okay, the protein bound factor, though the majority, is not biologically active. So that's the difference between total T3 and a free T3, or a total T4 and a free T4. But as I have told you, in majority of the cases, if they are not pregnant, if they are not in the ICU setting, doing total T3, total T4 is okay, because total T3, total T4 can be done in any lab and we will not go wrong.
Right. Dr. Nandakumar would like to know, what is physiological goiter?
So no such thing exists as physiological goiter. Goiter at any age requires proper assessment and proper treatment. So if the goiter is so if you have, say, a puberty, so a female in the age of puberty, so 13-year-old, 14-year-old female coming to you with goiter, you should do a T3, T4 TSH. If the TSH is normal, you should also do an antibody. Okay. If the antibodies are also normal, you should do an ultrasound to confirm whether it is diffuse or if there are any nodules there. If there are nodules, the patient should undergo an FNSC. If there are no nodules and if it is a diffuse goiter, thyroid function test is normal, antibodies are negative, then you should monitor this patient without treatment. Okay. But every goiter requires assessment. There is nothing as physiological goiter.
Right. Dr. Nitin would like to know how long do we need to treat a known case of hypothyroidism?
I think I have answered that. So it depends upon the type. So if it is autoimmune, it's lifelong. And if it's subclinical non-autoimmune, it may be temporary.
Right. So Himali would like to know if patient of hyperthyroid in TC scan, does it show papillary carcinoma?
If you are having hyperthyroidism and you do a thyroid technetium scan and the scan shows that there is a diffuse uptake, okay, so that points towards Graves. But suppose if there is in that diffuse uptake, you have got one non-functioning area. So there's small area of thyroid where there is no uptake. The rest of the gland is taking the uptake. Then this non-functioning area could harbor malignancy, and that non-functioning area then requires FNSC to see whether it is having PTC. Okay, so but PTC in a case of Graves is very, very, very rare. These are all isolated case reports. For all practical purposes, Graves disease is not malignant.
Yes, and in the same case, she mentioned weight loss is 14 kg in 6 months.
So that means it's hyperthyroidism which is not being treated properly.
Right. There's another question. Is history of which type of salt in goiter important?
No, that's not important. If the patients ask you what kind of salt he or she should be taking, you should tell them to have their routine iodized salt. The iodine which is contained in the salt is not in a quantity enough to cause any problems to you as long as you're having a moderate salt consumption. If the patient is having Graves disease, then definitely you should tell them to not to consume excess iodine in the form of say multivitamins which can contain iodine, or excess iodine in the form of say excess amount of, so whatever, say what are the dietary sources of iodine. So the iodized salt is one, seafood is another dietary source of iodine, and multivitamins is another source. So generally seafood or salt consumption in a patient, in an average patient, is moderate, and that really doesn't impact much on your thyroid. But multivitamins can contain high dosages of iodine, and then that can impact. So you should tell them to avoid if they are having Graves disease. For hypothyroidism, it really doesn't make any difference. They can consume whatever iodine that they want.
Right. Dr. Sagar would like to know what the maximum dose of thyroxine patient can take if he had missed doses while on treatment.
7 days, 1 week dose can be taken.
Right. Dr. Amruta wants to know, in autoimmune thyroiditis, what care should be taken along with medicines?
No care actually. I mean, taking the medicines is sufficient. Autoimmune hypothyroidism, having other autoimmune conditions is very, very rare. So we do not recommend that autoimmune thyroid patients undergo routine screening for other autoimmunities like say diabetes, or other autoimmunities like the celiac or pernicious anemia. That's really not required. We go according to the basis of symptoms. So if the patient has symptoms suggestive of celiac, then you go for celiac screening. But otherwise, autoimmune hypothyroidism, just take thyroxine and that's more than sufficient.
All right. So
I think we should ask Madam, is it okay to go for, because there are 7-8 questions more. So
I have no problem. I'm enjoying this.
Really quick. It's almost like a rapid fire.
I say yes, it is. Yeah, please. Okay.
So the next question is, in case of hypothyroidism following hemithyroidectomy for a big nodule, what should be the level of TSH maintained to prevent recurrence of the nodule?
So we need to understand the suppressive for dosages of thyroxine. That thing has gone out of the basket. Earlier, people used to give high dosages
Right.
to keep the goiter suppressed or so that the nodule doesn't come up, that no longer holds true. So if the patient has undergone hemithyroidectomy, though the nodule is big and if it is a benign nodule, then you do not need to give higher dosages of thyroxine. Give whatever is required to keep the TSH under control. But if the patient has had a malignancy, okay, the patient has thyroid malignancy and the patient has undergone thyroidectomy for that malignancy, then the TSH needs to be suppressed. And there are risk categories. So the histopathology report, the size of the nodule, the lymphadenopathy status. With that, there are 88 risk criteria. So but any patient belongs to high risk, moderate risk, low risk. Depending upon that, the TSH values are given. So in a high risk, the TSH has to be kept always less than 0.1. Moderate risk, it can be kept between 0.1 to 1. And for a low risk, it can be kept normal. So it depends upon what is your histopathology report.
Right. Dr. Gujarati would like to know, protein-bound iodine is nowadays done, and what is the significance?
Protein-bound iodine has got no role really in our practice. I mean, we don't need to do iodine status. If at all we want to do for epidemiological purposes. So suppose I want to know whether Pune is iodine sufficient or not. Then I would rather do a urinary iodine concentration of selective representative groups of individuals. Protein-bound iodine, we don't use it anytime.
Right. So Dr. Vijay would want to know, is it necessary to differentiate between thyroiditis and Graves' disease for treating hyperthyroidism? Can it be done without the TC scan?
So it is very important to differentiate, because if you don't differentiate, then the hyperthyroidism Graves' disease patient can actually worsen, okay, with time. So, and if the patient cannot afford a thyroid technetium scan, do a plain ultrasound. Okay, the ultrasound should talk about the thyroid gland, what is the size of the gland, are there any nodules, whether the vascularity of the gland is increased or decreased. So that will help you to differentiate Graves' disease and thyroiditis. Thyroiditis, the ultrasound will show vascularity which is less, okay, less vascularity. With Graves' disease, the vascularity is high. Please understand, the sonologist cannot differentiate between the two. Sonologist will always say, for Graves also, they will say that it is thyroiditis only, because they call it as autoimmune thyroiditis. So subacute thyroiditis and autoimmunity, they will not be able to differentiate. You will have to read the report by yourself. And after looking at the vascularity, the size of the thyroid, then you can differentiate between thyroiditis and Graves' disease.
Right. Very helpful. Dr. Chinmay wants to know, is it possible in pregnancy, normal TSH in first trimester and increases in third? Is it necessary to do it in the first and third trimester?
Yes, it is possible that you could be having a normal TSH in the first trimester. So when should you repeat? So you should repeat it in an individual who has positive antibodies, positive family history, or has had history that thyroid was there initially, first pregnancy mein kuch thyroid tha, medicine liye the. So such kind of females, when there is a, some history which is pointing towards, then you should always repeat the trimester TSH at least once in every trimester.
Right. So there is a question, what is the treatment for euthyroid?
Euthyroid what?
It's just said treatment for euthyroid. Capital U, thyroid. Sorry.
I haven't understood the question.
Right.
EU thyroid, that is EU THYROID. So that's the normal state of thyroid, and that doesn't require any treatment.
Right. And
Dr. Lina, I would suggest फक्त जे इम्पॉर्टंट अजून 2-3 क्वेश्चन्स असतील ते घ्या. खूप अजून 8-9 प्रश्न अजून पडलेले आले आहेत. या सो प्लीज. हा मॅडमची वायवा घेतल्यासारखं असं आम्ही बसतो. सो प्लीज म्हणजे फक्त जे इम्पॉर्टंट असतील लेटेस्ट. हा या थँक्स.
I think can thyroxine therapy alter level of antibodies?
Can thyroxine therapy change the level of antibodies? The answer is no. And we don't need to change the level of antibodies. So Even if the antibodies are high, it is not going to cause any impact in your life, and there's no need to keep on rechecking the antibodies to see whether it has gone up or gone down. That doesn't matter. Just continue taking the thyroxine therapy and don't be worried about the antibodies.
Right. So I think um, that summarizes all the questions which look really needing an answer. Over to you, ma'am, Dr. Rupa.
Thank you, madam. Now I request Mr. Sanket Barale, the founder and chairman of DigiShield, to speak something.
I think Sanket sir probably for some work is not able to present on behalf of DigiShield. Let me update all the participants. DigiShield is a teleconsultation platform which is really a very important need for all of us in today's COVID related practice. So, and it's a very doctor friendly as well as patient friendly kind of software. For more details, we will flash DigiShield consultant's number and other details on WhatsApp. So those doctors who are interested can contact DigiShield people and make use of this facility, which is provided to GPA members absolutely free of cost. So I as GPA president thank DigiShield, Mr. Dipen Shah and Bargale sir for their contribution in providing us this platform to conduct the session.
Download the DigiShield app from the Play Store or App Store now. New users will go through a quick one-time registration process. After filling in some basic information, registration is complete and you can start using DigiShield. Logging into DigiShield is easy, safe and secure. Enter your registered mobile number. An OTP is sent to your mobile. Enter the OTP and you are logged in. No passwords to forget. Making a patient's appointment is easy. Just click on the calendar sign, enter the patient's name and mobile number. Select date and time of the appointment and that's it. A confirmation message will be sent to the patient and so will a reminder. A day before the appointment, your patient will be automatically contacted by the DigiShield agent. The Shield agent will collect the patient's symptoms, history of present illness and more. The agent will also collect any consents or indemnity that you want to collect from them. Based on the DigiShield interaction, you will be alerted to the patient corona carrier risk. It's easy to do a phone or a video consultation with the patient. DigiShield recommends that patients that have been flagged with a high or moderate corona carrier risk should be consulted via consultation first. Click on the phone icon or the video icon to do a safe and secure teleconsultation with the patient. In order to issue an e-prescription to a patient, tap on the pencil icon, tap on the camera icon to take a photo of the prescription and you're all set. The prescription is sent securely to the patient immediately. DigiShield is easy to use and you will be online within 5 minutes of downloading the app. Download DigiShield on the Android Play Store or Apple App Store today. Protect yourself, your patients, your community. Download DigiShield for free today.
I am giving thanks. Our speaker, Dr. Varsha Jagtap, had already given a much better, much useful lecture for us and given answers more than 25 questions. And it is useful for our day-to-day practice. I thanks to Dr. Varsha Jagtap, madam. I also thanks to Dr. Leena Bonde, madam, convener. Thanks to DigiShield and special thanks to Lupin Private Limited, and with all participation, more than 100 doctors are there. Thank you for participating. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.